Hi, I'm Andy Selman, the CEO of One Sherpa. Yesterday, when we were talking, George was really unhappy. And we found George really unhappy because no matter how hard he was working, he couldn't find out where his money had gone. He thought that wealth was about accumulating things, but he'd got all that stuff, and even though he had all that stuff, he didn't have any money. He didn't realise that all of this had actually locked him up. And he thought that by accessing the equity in his home, he was going to be wealthy and free. But he felt more locked up than ever. He didn't have any choices in his life. He was kind of locked in just keeping going because he had all of that debt on board, and he sort of was frustrated because he felt let down by all the people that had said to him, access the equity in your home and everything will be okay. Get your stuff growing, get capital growth and everything will be fine for you. So what we've got to do today is go through and find out the steps that George took and what it was that made him happy, and see where he might have been able to do something different. So the place we're going to start today is where a lot of people start, and that is with their income. Now George was pretty happy in what he did. He was a happy camper. He actually really liked his job. And so he spent a lot of time at his job, which was great. And this created a lot of money, which came down into here. And as long as he was happy in his job, getting dollars in his job, getting this income, he was happy. The thing that made George sad, of course, was he needed to spend money just to stay alive. What with the bills for buying food and making his car go, all of those things, this actually made George a bit sad, because no matter how hard he worked, the expenses always seemed to almost come up to the income. And of course, there are three types of people in this world. There are the people who are really happy because their income is greater than their expenses. There are the other people who are actually quite sad because no matter how hard they go, their expenses are bigger than their income. But there is a third group of people, and they're the ones that don't know. They're the ones who are actually quite confused because they don't know which of these are bigger. In fact, they're somewhat in denial. And of course, the key for George was to get beyond his income and expenses out to a thing we call net income. Because if he could get out beyond these two boxes to his net income, then he would have choice. He would create the choice by having more income than expenses, and this of course would make him really happy. He had another person in his life as well, and that was Martha. And of course Martha was really happy when they had net income, because that gave her choice as well. And so if they could get out to this net income and have those choices, the family is really happy again. So let's pick them up. They've got to their net income. And now with that choice, they can go and buy things. And in fact, George and Martha had been here before because they'd already bought some stuff. And this is what we call accumulating capital. Now right at this point, of course, you have a choice as well, because this is the timing of when you buy things. And as you know, when George went and bought his stuff, he didn't have all of his money to buy it with, and so he actually used a little bit of debt to do that. So his net cash flow, he actually used some of the bank's money. And so he used some of his money, some of the bank's money, to accumulate capital. This is a really important point, because the faster you want to accumulate capital, the more debt that you have to use. The slower you want to accumulate the capital, the more chance you've got to save up by having your income greater than your expenses. And so if we pick George up here, he had, of course, bought his little house. He had also bought his little car. Now, one of the things about this type of capital is all it did was create expenses. And that wasn't going to help him get any of this stuff. And so he bought his investment property. And what he was hoping to do was to get income. And that would have been fine for him, except that he'd bought it too quickly and he'd used too much debt. And of course, that was going off against his expenses. One of the other points about George was he thought that if this capital just grew in value, if this just grew and grew and grew, he'd be wealthy. And of course he isn't, because the only way to get to true wealth, the only way to get to true dollars, is by yield and cash. And so George, of course, here was a little bit confused, because he had bought the wrong capital. He had cars, houses, all creating expenses. He'd gone too quickly into buying investment properties by using debt to do it. And the net result of that was there was more expenses coming into his world than additional income. And so he had to sit down and say, what do I now do to make myself better? He was a little bit confused. We still leave him not unhappy, but still a little confused, because he couldn't quite work out the context to what he was trying to do here. He was scurrying around with activity and not quite sure how all of that came together in one picture. So tomorrow when we come back, I'm going to show you how George put all of this onto one picture so that he could then have things in context. He could take himself from being confused to happy again. Thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow.